Dave Williams and Chief Phil Lukens, back to talk a little bit about agents, and specifically we're going to talk about SharePoint. And Chief, maybe you could talk a little bit about the power of SharePoint and some of the things that you've been doing recently, and then we can dive into this particular use case.
Well, I think we talk about, the email is the new Pony Express, but I think that we're already on Pony Express 3, if you will, and that is the opportunity to be sending files around all over the place is kind of a thing of the past, and it's going to become more so because it's difficult to combine all of those different files and look at all the different renditions or versions that people have. So having one central location for files is becoming the norm in any type of management in police departments. So with that being said, SharePoint is the solution in many cases for most folks to have that collaboration that occurs. And when we get to talking about a CTO system or FTO system, both with training our police officers and our dispatchers, we have a lot of information, a file that typically is all gathered up for these folks to learn all about the police department or the dispatch communication center in one location. They want to learn this. So SharePoint is an obvious solution to putting those documents together. And we're training our officers or training the CTO or the dispatcher on, okay, this is where you go, this is what you do. And the dispatcher needs to start learning a lot of different things. And as a part of that, there are milestones, there are tests typically that are happening in the San Jose model in the training. And whether or not it's modified for dispatch or your officers, they're gathering this information and learning it. So you have this information in your SharePoint, but suddenly this trainee has a lot of questions. And sometimes they have questions that the FTO doesn't have an answer for, or maybe it's something that they're both going to have to research, or maybe it is that, especially in smaller agencies, oftentimes you will assign this trainee to sit and study this material so the FTO can be working on some other task. They don't necessarily have the time to sit and answer these questions. How do I get this interaction? Well, I can get it from Copilot, and I can build this agent within the system that I already have, and it's going to be able to answer the questions. So for case in point, for sake of time, we have an example here where we can utilize the dispatcher is going to be trying to learn the CJIS manual, which we know is hundreds of pages. There's a lot of information there. It's very difficult to read it all and digest it all and then answer questions. So we want them to go through an exercise. We want them to go through a scenario of, asking these different questions. What can I do? What do I need to do? What am I allowed to do? So the dispatcher wants to say, gosh, so I get a phone call, and I'm going through these scenarios. I get a phone call that says, hey, I want you guys to run a license plate. I just want to know if the vehicle, who it belongs to, because it's parked in front of my house, and I want to, go contact the person and tell them to move. Can the dispatcher run that license plate and give that information of the registered owner to the caller? I think that's a scenario that is common. Another one might be, hey, I have a problem with so-and-so, and I want you to just run their name in the system and make sure that they don't have any types of warrants to be my kids' babysitter. Those are some of the calls that a dispatcher may be fielding or getting, and that's something they wouldn't just dispatch an officer to, so they're going to handle that more than likely internally. So what happens with those questions? So I'll leave it to you, Dave, and show us how this thing works and how they could make this agent very quickly on the data they have.
Yeah, great. So why you were using that example, I thought it would run, and truthfully, the only CJIS stuff that I really focus on is the CJIS compliance around the IT side of the system, but I know it's a huge amount of information, and there's a lot of knowledge to even be anywhere close to well studied on CJIS. But I asked that question: could a dispatcher run a license plate to provide information to a citizen on the ownership of a vehicle? And basically, it said no. Criminal history record information is highly it's considered CJI, and it has to be within certain policy and screening. And so the answer to the question for the dispatcher would be no, you can't do that. because you'd be violating CGIS and sharing information that can't be shared with an uncleared person. Pretty interesting that you can just ask that information right here over a document that's hundreds of pages. But to talk a little bit about how did we get here. So I'm in SharePoint, and as you know, in SharePoint, you can have all kinds of different file types and document libraries, etc. And I have one document library here that's just a CGIS policy loaded here, the latest version 6. And I wanted to build an agent. So it could be different ways it's laid out depending on how yours is configured. Mine has a thing that says AI actions, and in that AI actions, I can create an agent. And creating an agent is something we'll do a separate video on, but essentially think of an agent as being a very specific Copilot
Dave, sorry, I don't want to
capability.
interrupt you, but I need to
Yeah, go
interrupt
ahead.
you because on my screen, you actually have to go to the 3 dots and click on it, and then you'll see a Copilot link. So I just wanted to have that so if people go, well, I don't have it. You might,
Yep.
like Dave said, it's just laid out differently. So take a minute to explore. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just explore what's on, and the more you shorten this, of course, the less that things show up. So if you have 3 dots, always expand there on the ellipse so you know what's in there. So I now have an agent. So this is a Copilot agent with a very specific task of looking at the CGIS policy. It sits inside the same folder. It's built with that. I can make this available inside of Copilot, so I could surface it there, so people wouldn't have to come to SharePoint to get this, but they would get the same experience. And you can make it available in Microsoft Teams or other channels, just depending on where you want it. But for the sake of simplicity, we've kept it right here. If I go here and I click on the ellipse, I get all of these other things that I can do with it, as well as I can open it in this side window or open it somewhere else. So I've opened it in the side window. So then what you have is the ability to learn about CGIS policy, how it pertains to you and your particular job. So Chief talked about a dispatcher, very specific question. Can I share this information with a member of the community that's got a car parked in front of their house and they need to know who the owner is? The answer is no. You're going to have to call law enforcement and have law enforcement come over. They could run the plate, or they could have it, you could have it towed, or whatever the appropriate response would be, but you can't get that information because it's protected. Chief,
So,
what other questions?
well, I was just going to say, a more complex question that may come up is a police officer might be asking a dispatcher, they're on a barking dog call. It's just a barking dog call. And the police officer asked the dispatcher to run a triple I to get all of the criminal history on the person that they're talking to on a barking dog call. Is it available? Are they able to run the triple I just
Triple I
for,
as in I.
yeah, just for a investigation that you're doing on or a complaint of a barking dog, not an investigation, a barking dog complaint, subject of a barking dog complaint. That's probably the best way to word it. Sorry. That's a very simple call. You'll get calls like that maybe aren't these major in-depth criminal investigations, and there's a difference. And I want to see how this does in explaining that, because if I can't just run a criminal history for anybody. And the officer might not realize that. And the dispatcher is responsible for knowing what they're running through. So what does it have to say, Dave?
Well, I put it in there the best that I could as you were talking through it, basically trying to get to the gist that it's a barking dog call, and can you run a triple I, which is interesting because I didn't know what that was, interstate identification index. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's basically the criminal history.
Criminal history, okay. Information obtained from the triple I is considered criminal history record information, which is subject to strict access, use, and dissemination rules. Triple I must only be accessed for authorized purposes, and any use of CHRI must be consistent with the authorized purpose. CHRI cannot be accessed or used arbitrarily, even by law enforcement personnel. It must be tied to a legitimate criminal justice function, such as an investigation, prosecution, or adjudication. A barking dog call is typically considered a non-criminal or civil nuisance matter unless there is a clear criminal nexus. For example, the individual is suspected of a crime, or there is a legitimate law enforcement reason to believe CHRI is needed, then running a III would not be authorized under CJIS policy.
And so that would be consistent with what I'm trying to explain, and that is, so you're just on a complaint of a barking dog. This isn't a felon that I'm looking for drug trafficking on. So it's a whole different world, and we can't just run IIIs on everybody. That's a common mistake that happens in dispatch centers, record centers, and among police officers. They're like, well, it's criminal, I can just do that. You have to be careful about what the definition of criminal is, because a minor municipal ordinance violation is not the same. And this provided that information in seconds, where that can end up becoming a discussion that takes a few hours between supervisors and everybody else. Somebody that's pretty versed in running criminal histories does know this by now, if you will, but that trainee wouldn't. And so again, they're learning from scenarios. This is a great way to help them. And back to that small agency where their trainer doesn't have the time because they're working or multitasking, this takes a ton of time out of that. I think it's a wonderful illustration and great example. So thanks, Dave, for taking the time.
Yeah, and just real quick, Chief, as we're getting ready to wrap, trying to keep this short, I was thinking of it as that training scenario and something I wasn't sure would work very well, but I asked this agent if it could create a 10-question quiz on the proper use of CHRI. So if you're trying to really get somebody to understand, like, could you use it this way or can you use it that way? And it is kicking out a multiple choice 10-question quiz that you could, one, take, and then two, go back and look up your answers, just depending on how it is that you learn. But here's another use case for agents and generative AI in the context of policing and trying to train people on information.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of this is, look, that's a national program. Everybody's using this. I mean, everybody uses CJIS, right? That's just how you're accessing systems across this nation. And so you now have an opportunity to learn from it, grow from it. And no matter what your agency size is, or no matter what's going on, you have the opportunity to really expand your ability to be more proficient and give a greater service to the public and reduce liability for the agency.
Awesome. Well, I hope that you find this helpful. Look for more videos. We're going to try to get back on a regular cadence of putting these out, but we'll be diving in more deeply to agents of all different styles and types. I really do think that agentic AI is going to make a big difference in the way that we access and use information and free up time for law enforcement and others to focus on the things that they really are passionate about doing, where humans are the best resource to engage, and we can leave some of the administrative process to the IT systems.